Welcome to everyone trickling in. We'll get started at 3 minutes past the hour just to give everyone a little bit of time. Welcome again to everyone who's been trickling in. We're just going to get started a few minutes past the hour to give everyone some time to join. Okay, that looks like 4:03 on my clock, so we can go ahead and get started. Thanks everyone for joining us. We're hoping to provide information today about the application process for the MIT Physics PhD program. My name is Swathi. I'm a second year PhD student in the Astrophysics division, and we have with us several panelists who are current students who will introduce themselves after I sort of go through some introductory information. So before I begin, I just want to give a disclaimer that none of the stuff that we're sharing here is the official stance of the admissions committee. So you're going to hear, opinions that we have based on our own experiences, and we don't really have any insight into who will be admitted. And so we're just hoping that this should be general information that can help everyone. And so, like I said, we're going to start with an introductory presentation to just go over what the application looks like, and then we'll turn it over to the Slido, which should be linked in the chat where you can submit questions, and our panel of students will answer them to the best of their abilities. So our application is due on December 15th. You'll be able to get to the online application portal where it will ask for some biographical data. We have an application fee, which is $90 at MIT, and we just want to highlight the fact that we do have fee waivers, and so definitely don't be afraid to ask. We require transcripts from your previous universities, along with 3 letters of recommendation. And you'll also have spaces to list your research, your any honors and awards that you've won. You'll also be submitting a statement of objective or a statement of purpose to just describe sort of your intended research. And there's also an optional personal statement, and we recommend submitting the physics GRE scores along with your application. To highlight a little bit more about the fee waivers, so applicants who've participated in certain programs such as MSRP or Converge are automatically eligible for a fee waiver. And if you feel like the application fee will pose a barrier, then you're able to request a fee waiver from our OGE. So we have a link here. And if you're not able to get a fee waiver through OGE, you'll then be prompted to submit a fee waiver to the department within the application portal. And importantly, a fee waiver request will only be considered before you've actually submitted your application, but after you've completed all the parts of your application, including things like uploading your transcripts. So just make sure that you're leaving some time in to be able to actually request the fee waiver when you're filling out your application. And so because there won't be any fee waivers for incomplete applications, and this deadline is December 1st. So just mark your calendars for that. We also have a number of sort of language placement exams. And so we're often asked if there's a specific cutoff score for these exams. And while there's not a specific cutoff score for admissions, the students who are admitted to our program are typically scoring in these ranges that are listed here. So a 7 on the IELTS, 200 on the computer TOEFL, or 100 on the other TOEFL. And as far as if you should take these exams, they're required if you're from a country in which English is not the primary language, with exceptions if you've either studied in the US or a country whose official language is English for 3 years, or will receive a degree from a college or university where your instruction is done in English. And so all of this information you can find on the FAQs of the admissions website. We also get asked a lot about faculty sponsors. Do you need to reach out to faculty members or have anyone ready to sponsor you before you apply? And the answer is no. You do not need to have a faculty who's agreed to sponsor you. So most often students will reach out to faculty after you're admitted and then sort of discuss research fit and things like that. We also want to highlight our physics website, which has an entire page on admissions information for prospective graduate students. You'll have lots of links for things like FAQs, all the required materials, some other information and guidance. And specifically, I want to highlight this FAQs because they really have thorough answers to all of the most frequently asked questions, including the perhaps most common question of what is included in a strong graduate applications for physics at MIT. And we also have a number of other questions that I'll go through really quickly to answer. Do you need to have a degree in physics in order to apply? No. What are the requirements to complete the PhD? They're all listed on the website. Can you take courses at other universities nearby? Yes. The average time it takes to complete the PhD here is 5 to 7 years. You'll be supported through a TA, an RA, or a fellowship financially. We get around 2,000 applications every year and about 90 students are accepted. There's no minimum grade or exam scores for any of our admitted students. The deadline for applying is December 15th. The GRE, the physics GRE is recommended. And we discussed the various English language exams. The department does provide fee waivers. We don't currently have any programs to arrange a visit to the department or research area, but if you're admitted, we do have an open house for students. And as far as receiving an update on the status of your applications, this is you'll find that out after it's submitted. You'll be notified of final decision before March 1st. And in rare cases, students can start in a term other than the fall semester after you've applied. Another website that I really want to highlight is our PhysGap website. So here you'll find recordings and transcripts of previous webinars. And once we get this webinar transcribed, we'll also put that up on the website. It can take a couple of weeks for that process to happen, but there's also a number of different resources on our PhysGap website that you should definitely check out. And I also want to plug that we have a number of other programs that are run also by PhysGap. We have our office hours program, in which we'll have different current students who will host a Zoom room where you can come in and ask questions that might be specific to your application or any things that you're unclear about in the application process. And then later this fall, for anyone that feels like you sort of need even more hands-on assistance, we have a one-on-one mentorship program. And so we, in general, say that this mentorship may be a good fit for you if you feel like you lack other resources to help you navigate the application process, if you've used other forms of assistance like the questions and answers that you'll get from this webinar, and also if you've attended office hours and you still feel like you need more assistance, and if you feel like you could benefit from one-on-one application mentorship. And to learn more about all of these programs, you should also visit our PhysGap website. Okay, so we'll now turn this over to the Q&A, and we should have the Slido link also in the Zoom chat and also in the email that you should have received. And definitely also upvote questions, but I'll now turn it over to our panelists to introduce themselves.
Hi, I can introduce myself first. I'm Kyle. I'm a fifth-year student in AMO, originally from the United States. And I'll say Sean next.
Hi, I'm Sean. I'm a fourth-year student in NewPat. I'm originally from the United States, and I'll popcorn it over to Jess.
Hi, I'm Jess. I'm a second-year physics PhD student in condensed matter experiment. I'm here to help out with the moderation. Oh, I'll pass it up to Kusheen.
Hi, I'm Kusheen. I'm a first-year PhD student in condensed matter experiment. I'm an international student originally from China, but I did my undergrad in the US. And I'll ask Jennifer to go next.
Hi, everyone. Excuse me. I am Jenny Rush. I am the graduate coordinator for physics. I'm here to answer any questions, and I will pass it on to Shannon.
Hi, I'm Shannon. I'm the Assistant Director of Academic Programs. Along with Jenny, love answering questions. And I will pass it along to Chris.
Hi, I'm Chris. I'm a third-year student in the Astrophysics Division, originally from the US. And I'll pass it to Kaylin.
Hi, I'm Kaylin. I'm a second-year student in the Astro Division, also from the US.
I think that's everyone. So I'll go ahead and share the Slido, and the way that this will work is I'll read out a question, and then anyone who's interested in answering can maybe just raise your hand or unmute yourself, and then we can go through as many questions as we can hit. Okay, hopefully everyone can see the screen. Great. So our first question is, will the admissions decision be made based on the admissions team or professor that I mentioned in the application form? Sean?
Yeah, so the process is a little bit complicated. So the way it typically works is it's kind of a two-stage process. And okay, someone jump in if I'm misremembering, but the first stage is kind of done at the level of the admissions committee as a whole, and various aspects of the application are kind of looked at and judged on general grounds. About something like half of the applications make it to the second stage, at which point those applications are then, read again and passed around to the divisions, and that's the stage where it's done differently depending on which division, but that's the stage where the professor that you mentioned would be relevant and will likely read your application.
Okay, I think that's a great answer, and we can probably move on to the next question, which is, should I contact professors at MIT to ask if they'll accept students next fall? Chris?
Yeah, I'll say I don't think there's something inherently wrong with reaching out and asking that question, but you're not necessarily likely to get a response from professors who are fielding hundreds of these emails. You might have more success by reaching out to graduate students in the professors' groups. They might know what the professor, if the professor's accepting students, and they can also give you more information about the group. But yeah, it's okay to reach out, but don't feel like you've been rejected if they don't respond to your email.
Great. If no one has anything to add, then we can move on. So next question, what do you wish you had known when applying to graduate school? Kyle?
I'll say that one thing that I have learned since being involved with these admission initiatives that I didn't know when I was applying is just how important it is to consider the professors that you would want to work with at the school that you're going to. So to make sure that it's a good fit for you, but also to get that across to the admissions committee. And a lot of times the admissions committee is looking for half a page or more of your 2-page statement of purpose to be about which professors you want to work with and why that's a good fit.
I'll also jump in and say, one of the things that I wish that I had known is that you're not sort of bound to the exact subfield of research that you did when you were an undergraduate student or your past research. If you can sort of describe what things in your previous research experiences make you excited for maybe a new subfield, it's totally okay to want to do something different as a graduate student. And I was definitely worried when I was applying that people might not take that seriously if I hadn't had a really extensive previous history doing something like that. So I would say, yeah, feel comfortable in hoping to branch out and do things outside of what you've done previously. Okay, maybe we can move on to our next question, which is, what is the graduate student culture like in the physics department? Kaylin?
Overall, I would say it's pretty division specific. So I can speak a lot more to Astra than I can the other divisions. So someone can correct me if I'm wrong. I think MIT is one of the largest physics graduate programs in the country. And we're split into these different research divisions. So there's a lot more community within the divisions than with the physics program more broadly, simply because those are the people that you're going to interact with a lot more on a day-to-day basis. There's certainly within Astro, it's a very collaborative, non-competitive environment. And my understanding of other divisions is that it's similar. You have these kind of horizontal connections where you know people within your year, and then you have these vertical connections where you know a lot of other people within your division. But unless you're participating in a lot of extracurriculars, you might not get to know people in other years and other divisions quite as well. But within Astro, we have game nights, we have lunch every week all together. There's a lot of positive community building events that we do.
Do any of our non-Astro students also want to share something about your experience with the graduate student culture? Yeah, Sean?
Yeah, I'll just jump in to say, so NUPAT is within the Center for Theoretical Physics, and the CTP is pretty similar in so far as you get to know, like Kaylin said, you get to know people in your year across multiple divisions, and also lots of people within your division in different years, lots of events, and I suspect that's pretty similar across most divisions.
Great. Our next question is, I did research in various physics areas, How could I best structure my statement of purpose to explain my academic background? Should I discuss each project or most important ones? Chris?
Yeah, I think I was in a pretty similar boat, and the strategy that I adopted, and I think that kind of works, is to make sure that you're including the ones for which you can kind of directly connect it to what you want to do. And if you have a whole bunch of experiences, you might have to leave one or two out in order that so you're not just rushing through and saying, I did this, I did this, I did this. But from each of these different research areas that you worked in, make sure that you're able to spend a sentence or two highlighting why that prepared you to do something, to do what you're interested in now.
Great. So our next question is, a lot of people say that MIT looks for the best fit. So what does best fit look like to you? What criteria should be met? I can maybe start this one off. So usually when people say best fit, they're talking about research fit. And so what that means is that there should be somebody who's able to support graduate students actually working in the subfields that you're interested in. So for example, I work in high energy instrumentation within astrophysics. So that means that I'm working on building telescopes, and I'm specifically working in the X-ray wavelength. And so that's a pretty specific area to be working in. There's not a lot of universities that necessarily do that. And so MIT was a good fit for me because there were multiple labs that were sort of working in that area. And more importantly, there were people who had the funding to take on a graduate student. So I think that's usually what people mean when they say good fit. Yep, Kyle?
I'll also add that there is there's another side to this too, which is the like sort of academic requirements. So as part of doing the PhD at MIT, there's you know, sort of requirements for classes and exams that you need to pass. And so it's also important to show, usually more through your transcripts and maybe your PGRE score, that you will be able to succeed in the classes and the exams that are required for the program as well.
Yeah, great. So we can move on to our next question, which is the physics GRE is recommended. Unfortunately, the cost of taking a test is a financial barrier to me. Will it impact my application negatively if I don't take it? Shannon?
I can take this one a little bit. We understand that the test can be expensive for some people and that it can be a barrier. The admissions committee gets it. The PGRE is more an opportunity for someone who has the physics chops, but doesn't necessarily have the transcript or research background to show those chops. It's another way of bolstering your application. If you've got a stellar transcript and you've got the research experience, then not taking the PGRE isn't going to affect your application negatively at all.
Kyle?
I'll also mention briefly that if this is the case and you're not able to take the PGRE for some reason or other, scheduling or costs or things like that, that's something that can go in the optional personal statement.
Great. Let's move on to our next question. So, being a second cycle applicant, is it looked as good or bad? Is anything considered for my last cycle's application? Kyle?
So my understanding, and anyone's welcome to correct me if I'm wrong, is that the committee, there is a flag somewhere in there, then the committee does know that this is your second time around applying again. And so they're going to be looking specifically for like, what have you done to improve your application over the last time? And that's definitely something that you would want to call out in your statements, like, since a year ago or two, however long it was, I've done this, that, and the other to improve my application.
Great. We can move on to our next question. In the statement of purpose, would you recommend mentioning 2 or more faculty that you want to work with rather than only one? Sean?
Yeah, so I guess yes, I would definitely say don't just mention one faculty member. People's funding situations are in flux and they might not be able to commit to funding a student. So even if it's a perfect match, it might just not work out for reasons that have nothing to do with you. Now, I would say the only exception is if there's legitimately only one person you can imagine working with. I don't think that would be the case in most situations, but don't lie. Don't say you'd be happy working with someone that you don't think you would be. But if you could imagine working with more than a single faculty member, I would definitely recommend indicating that.
Chris?
Maybe just a small pitch in, like, I think people have said that like 2 or 3 is a good number. Don't go too overboard listing like an entire field. That can, on the other end, make it look like a bit of indecision. So
Great. Next question is, for international students, does the stipend cover the tuition? What is the take-home pay? Mm-hmm.
The fellowship, or if your professor's paying, it covers the tuition, and the stipend is enough for to live in Boston. And for your reference, I actually saved about 30% of my stipend last month.
Mm-hmm.
it's my understanding, and maybe someone can correct me, that like fellowship, RITA, I think it's my understanding that the physics department makes them all equal in the end, so that everyone gets paid the same amount. So just to add on.
That's correct. All the stipends are the same.
The one thing that I'll note here is that if you're funded through a fellowship, the way that you pay your taxes works a little bit differently. And so it can be the case that your take-home pay will vary slightly based on just your funding type, but your sort of pre-tax rate will be the same across the board, and the difference isn't much. Jenny?
I just want to make clear, because we get this question a lot, that all grad students are fully funded. So that is something that we do cover.
Great. So let's move on to our next question. Are recommendation letters really more important than GPA? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so both of these are important in your application, but at the end of the day, the primary output of your PhD is your thesis, and it's your original research. So recommendation letters that speak to your ability to be a researcher and to those research skills are one of the most compelling pieces of evidence you can provide that you'd be a good fit. That's not to say that GPA isn't important. It's just that at the end of the day, the focus of the PhD is not necessarily the classes. You need to get through the classes, but that's not the focus.
Great. Our next question is, how specific should my statement of interest be in terms of the field of physics that I wish to work on during the PhD? Also, what problems I may hope to work on. Kaylin?
This harkens back a bit to the earlier question about what does best fit mean to you, and also how many professors to mention in your SOP. And that you want to show that your interests align very well with the kind of research that's being done at MIT. So if you go hardcore into one very specific area and that's not actually something that a faculty member is really working on, that's going to be a jarring lack of fit with MIT. But if you're incredibly broad, you're similarly not going to show how exactly you and your interest in your work will mesh with the kind of stuff that's being done at MIT. So that's a little bit of a non-answer where I'm saying, you want to strike a balance here, but I would say it's good to be very specific. Show that you've done your research on these professors and the kind of work that they've done. Look at the recent papers that the groups you're interested in have put out, and reference, make sure that you understand what is actually happening in the department recently. But don't pigeonhole yourself too soon either. Make sure that you allow yourself the flexibility to, in your statement, and also when you're actually going through graduate school, try out different things and be a little flexible in the work that you want to do.
I'll add a small piece of advice here, which is sometimes going on a faculty member's professional website can be helpful in seeing sort of what they're working on or what's important to them. And sometimes they'll even link to sort of like science communication articles and things like that, which can be helpful if you feel like you're not like super well versed in the specifics of the research that they're working on. Definitely try and sort of make an attempt to understand what they're working on from a technical perspective, especially if you're interested in working with them. But that can be a good place to start if you feel a little overwhelmed by just like jumping on the archive and then trying to cold read a bunch of papers from people. Okay, let's move on to our next question, which is, it says on the website that the PGRE, the physics GRE, is recommended but not required. So by peer pressure, it would be required, right? The answer to this is no. It's listed as recommended because it truly is recommended, but not required. So speaking to the question that someone had before of if the physics GRE proves to be a sort of barrier to you being able to submit a successful application, or if there's sort of financial barriers or other things like that, then it is not a required element of the application. It's just recommended as an additional data point for the admissions committee to be able to consider. Shannon.
And as I said before, if you have a problematic transcript at all or any kind of a background issue, first of all, mention it in your personal statement, but also the PGRE might be an opportunity for you to show how well you do in physics.
Okay, let's move on to our next question, which is, what is your work-life balance as a graduate student?
Mine is pretty solid. I would say I generally work in the 9 to 5 regime, or if I want to take a few hours off in the middle of the day to do something else, I will do that and then finish up whatever work I need to do later in the day. But this is certainly, I think when you're taking classes in your first 2 years, as you probably know from undergrad, those often take up a lot more time, and you can't really, at least I could never fit that into a traditional 9 to 5. But graduate school, especially as you continue on, becomes often becomes more of a typical work schedule. And this, going off that, it is very important to make sure that your advisor's work-life balance messages with the kind of work that you, the kind of life balance that you want. So when you're admitted to graduate schools and are considering different people to work for, I would talk to those their graduate students and see what the actual lab culture is like, because that can vary tremendously between advisors at different institutions.
Kyle?
Yeah, I totally agree with that. It varies sort of by advisor, and I also will say that it varies through time. So, like Kaylin said, when you're taking classes, a lot of time that just takes a lot of time, but also I think a lot of people, if there's a conference or a proposal deadline or something coming up, you might work more than 40 hours that week, but the rest of the year, you're working the 9 to 5.
Okay, let's move on to our next question. Are there opportunities to meet or work with other research teams from other labs and locations during the PhD? I can answer from my perspective. So because I work on building telescopes, I work a lot with various mechanical engineering labs and also sort of aeroastro labs. And so it's definitely possible to work with research teams in other labs and other places throughout your PhD. There are also different like fellowship opportunities and things like that that will make it easier for you to say spend a summer maybe at a national lab or somewhere else on site, which is something that some of our students participate in, and that can actually count for one of your academic requirements depending on what the rest of your class schedule looks like. And at least in Astro, there's also a lot of collaboration between various research group within our own division with each other. So I have an advisor, but I also collaborate with other faculty or other graduate students and things like that. And that's pretty common in Astro. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think it definitely varies depending on research area and what topic you're working on, but I think you would be pretty hard pressed to find a PhD student who didn't collaborate with professors and graduate students from other institutions at some point throughout their studies.
Great. Let's move on to our next question. In broad strokes, what is the message you're trying to convey in the statement of purpose, and what is it for the personal statement? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so in broad strokes, I would say that the statement of purpose is really kind of like a research and preparation statement. So like, you would talk about things like research experiences you've had in the past, what you want to what sort of research you would like to pursue at MIT, and how your past experiences have prepared you to do that. Whereas the personal statement is a lot more kind of catch-all. So as was mentioned earlier, the personal statement would be a good place to mention if financial barriers prevented you from taking the physics GRE, or if you ran into other obstacles over the course of your undergrad studies that you would like to have contextualizing other areas of your application while the admissions committee is reading it. So I think of the personal statement kind of as a place for you to add a bunch of context that doesn't necessarily fit elsewhere.
I'll add, I'm not sure that this is like the explicit purpose of the personal statement, but I used my space in the personal statement to talk about some of the other things that I participated in that were important to me as an individual, but maybe didn't meet the strict confines of, things like research and classes. So I focused on some of the outreach projects that I spent a lot of my time in as an undergrad, or other things like that that maybe are really important to your individual story, but don't have a home anywhere else in the application process explicitly. Great, let's move on to our next question. Well, what is the admissions committee looking for from the personal statement? That seems pretty similar to what we just answered, but does anyone have anything else to answer with? If not, we can move on. Okay, hopefully we found our previous answer satisfactory. Next question is it best to avoid mentioning being a second cycle applicant? So I think there's actually a place on the application where you will be prompted to check whether this is like if you're not applying for the first time, but maybe this is not true. Yes, Shannon.
Yes, the application portal tracks whether you are a second cycle applicant or not. So it's not so much whether you mention or not, we'll know. But also it's not necessarily a bad thing. It may have been that the year that you applied, there were simply 2,000 other applicants who were similarly fantastic, and it was the luck of the draw. It may have been that a faculty member who would have really liked to work with you was on leave that year. So there's no shame in being a second cycle applicant.
Great. Let's move on to our next question, which is how is the culture of the Center for Theoretical Physics, or CTP, in general? We heard a little bit about this, but Sean, if you'd like to add anything more.
Yeah, so okay, so I'll try not to rant endlessly. It's a very general question, but I would say it's pretty positive. There are various, social events throughout the week, like there's the CTP hour Fridays at 4. Different research groups have group meetings, and sometimes visiting speakers give talks in those, and then everyone is invited and we go crash someone's group meeting and watch a talk. Lots of chatting by the coffee machine, very collaborative. Yeah, good vibes, I guess. Sorry if you were asking about something specific. I'm probably leaving out a lot of aspects, but.
Great, thanks for that further insight. Our next question is, how is the MIT Physics grad application process internally different from other universities? Are all the applications read, or are they ranked?
So I guess I don't know how it is at other universities, but I can say that all of the applications, or at least all of the complete submitted applications, do get read by more than one person even. There is in the first round some sort of course ranking that's just kind of thrown into a small number of buckets, and then those buckets get sent on to the divisions to then read. And there is a lot of kind of behind the scenes processing that goes on as far as like calculating a GPA that just takes into account your physics courses and all sorts of other metrics that the admissions committee has come up with, but they all seem very well thought out from what I've heard.
And Kyle touches on maybe another kind of unique point about the physics application process here, which is that there is some sort of division-specific review elements. And so at least in the Astro division, for example, they offer a sort of number of interviews in addition to the completed application once things like that are reviewed. And so there are elements that are reviewed by the division that you check that you're interested in participating in. So just something to keep in mind. Okay, let's move on to our next question, which is, my research is under review and may not be accepted before the application deadline. Will this affect my application? Any suggestions?
So two things on this. One is that you should absolutely put like submitted and here's the archive link or whatever in your application. You should absolutely include your sort of pending publication. But also I think you will get an email at some point in like late December, early January, something like that, with a link where you can go and add, like make changes, add completed publications and enter your grades for the fall semester. Is that still the case, Shannon?
Yeah,
Yeah, so
you'll be able to update a transcript and update your CV.
yeah.
And another suggestion here is if the research that you're doing is done with one of your letter writers, then they're able to highlight, and you should feel free to ask them to highlight the fact that you submitted this piece of research and that it's under review. And that's another thing that can, again, support the fact that you've made it through, and it's just like a question of when the actual acceptance will be. Okay, our next question is, how important is each element of the application? I think we have some hesitance from our panelists because there's not a single straightforward answer to this question. Maybe Shannon can jump in here.
Yeah, it's I can't say that any element is more important than any other because they really do use holistic evaluation and try to evaluate every single part of the application. If you're worried about some part that you don't think is up to snuff, by all means, use the personal statement to give context for that. But the application is viewed as a whole. There aren't pieces that are less than other pieces.
Well said. And kind of jumping off of that question, our next question is there a rubric which MIT follows for reviewing applications? So I think the general answer here is no. Each application is reviewed sort of individually. Okay. Our next question is, I will complete my 3-year bachelor's program next June. Is this sufficient to apply, although I will not have a 4-year bachelor's like in the US? Maybe Chris can go first.
Sure. Yeah, I think once again, this is a case where the PGRE is a good place to show that you met the kind of undergraduate, the expectations that MIT has.
And Shannon?
I can also say that MIT general requirements say that you must have a bachelor's degree or equivalent. They don't specify where it has to be a 3 or 4-year bachelor's. So if you have a bachelor's degree, that suffices.
Excellent. Our next question is it harder to get accepted into theoretical fields rather than experimental ones? I think, again, we don't have a specific number here for the acceptance rate for different divisions. I think a lot of this will depend year to year based on, again, like funding for faculty and who's actually able to take students. I don't know if anyone else has anything that they'd like to add to that. Okay, well, If not, we can move on to our next question, which is, how will my application strength be affected if I have extensive research experience, but my transcript is not very strong? Is there a GPA filter? Shannon?
There's no GPA filter, but this is another call for the PGRE. This is where the PGRE would really help you out.
Great. And our next question is, are there any unofficial page limits to the statement of purpose and the CV?
So I don't know about the CV, but I know there is a recommended like 500 word limit for the or sorry, the statement of purpose. Okay, sorry. The personal statement has a recommended 500 word max. The statement of purpose, I think, is supposed to be 2 pages or less. And then, yeah, I don't know about the CV.
Yeah, I'll just add, keep in mind that there's a large volume of applications being reviewed. And so if you exceed the recommended limits by sort of an extensive amount, then you run into the risk of your entire application maybe not being able to be reviewed as thoroughly, just because of needing to get through all of those applications. So keep that in mind. Okay, our next question is, how did you all go about structuring your personal statements? What are the key aspects from your undergraduate experiences that you chose to highlight? Kaylin?
I structured my personal statement as here's a collection of things that I'm involved in that contribute to who I am as a scientist that aren't directly research related. A scientist, someone who is not going to just do research. They're going to mentor others. They're going to teach. They're going to communicate to audiences at different levels. So I talked about the kinds of people and work that got me into physics and what I went through to get to my interest in physics, just briefly. And then I talked about some of the outreach work and community engagement things that I've done. And I'm not telling anyone to do those for the sake of an application, but for me, they were important to my story as a physicist and what got me to wanting to go into a graduate degree in physics. And so those are the pieces that I tried to highlight. Here's what contributes to my identity as a scientist that is not my specific research preparation for grad school.
Okay, and Keishan?
So I did not have any special circumstance that I feel like I have to explain to the community. So in my personal statement, what I was thinking at the moment was that I had arts and physics as double majors, and I was asked by a lot of people, why did you choose these 2 majors since they seem to be very far apart? So I thought maybe it's a good place to explain how I feel my art major and my physics major are interconnected, and what the transferable skills I gained from having both majors that can make me into a better researcher, better team worker, better mentor.
Great. And our next question is, this is open to everyone. What part of your application were you most proud of? Maybe because you personalized it in a certain way, or how impactful it was. Maybe I can get us started. I think one of the things that I worked really hard on when I was crafting my application was making sure that my statement of purpose and really all of my written statements reflected my sort of authentic voice. I think it can sometimes feel like you just have to list all of your accomplishments and then try and sound like the best applicant and the smartest person, but also making sure to have sort of like your personality, your sense of humor as much as you can, try and shine through in these statements. helped a lot. So I had a first draft of my SOP that I showed one of my research advisors and one of my letter writers, and she took a look at it and she was like, that doesn't sound like you. Like, write something that sounds like it's coming from your voice. And so I worked pretty hard on that. And I think hopefully was able to improve upon that and then submit something that really felt like it came through in my voice.
One thing in my application that I think really helped me is the advisor I worked at as an undergrad student. I worked hard during my undergrad, so that advisor thought really high of me. So I kind of used her connection to learn about the different research that other professors are doing that's similar to what I was already doing. So besides reading their papers or reading their group websites from the internet, I also learned about what they're doing from my previous advisor.
Awesome. And our next question is, how much undergraduate research experience is considered a strong application? So just to jump in here, I think it's important for us to acknowledge that not everyone has access to the same sort of opportunities at your various undergraduate institutions. And if you feel like you maybe didn't have as much ability to participate in undergraduate research, that's another thing to highlight maybe in your personal statement, or just know that you won't be held to a standard that wouldn't have been reasonable given the resources that you had as an undergraduate student. Anything else to add? Maybe just as one other data point, at least for me personally, I only started research the summer after my first year, and then I was an undergraduate student through COVID, so there were also sort of breaks in my research through part of the middle of my time as an undergraduate student. So I think definitely as much as you can feasibly accomplish and seems reasonable given your undergraduate research opportunities. Okay, next question. Does it matter if a well-known person gives the recommendation, or is it more important if someone who knows you well but is not as famous gives a recommendation?
Yeah, I think it's much more important that the person who's writing your letter of recommendation knows you well and will convey your strengths and why you fit in to what you're trying to do. Yeah, people who are reading your application don't, consider the H-index of the recommender. They're just trying to learn about you. So.
Yeah, so that's totally true. Like, your letter of recommendation needs to be like focused on you, right? Like, it's not just going to be like, oh, this person has a letter from a Nobel laureate, they're definitely getting in. But I will say that this can be taken too far. And so people have certain things that they're looking for when they read letters. And one of those things is often that the letter is written by a professor as opposed to a postdoc or a senior grad student or something, even if that's someone who you worked more directly with and who knows your work better. And what often happens in reality is, you ask the PI of your group who is well-known or, more well-known, and they have the grad student or postdoc that you were working with write the letter, and then they stamp their seal of approval on it or something. So this is something where I would definitely recommend talking to your mentors and asking very explicitly for their guidance, and if they feel comfortable writing you a strong letter and speaking to your abilities and so on.
Great. So we're coming close to the end of the hour, and obviously there's still several unanswered questions, and from the looks of it, a lot of really important questions that we still haven't answered. And so before we sort of close off this webinar, I want to again plug some of the other resources that we have, including the office hours, which if you all found out about this webinar by being emailed the information through our mailing list, then you'll also be emailed information about our office hours. But if you are not yet on our mailing list, you can visit the PhysGap website and fill out, there's a short form that we'll just collect your email address for, so you can be added to the mailing list. And then later on, we'll also open up applications for our one-on-one mentorship program. So we hope that through all of these different resources that we can help answer any questions that you have about the application process. Kyle has linked the PhysGap website in the chat, so feel free to visit that. And we hope that this was helpful for you. So thank you all very much for joining us.